you for joining us for this first Idaho 5 for 5 Soil Health Roundtable. Co-hosting with me today, I have Linda Schott and Jackie Jameson. They are our University of Idaho Extension partners. Jackie is a soil health extension instructor.
Jen.
Linda Schott is assistant professor and extension specialist in nutrient and waste management. I really appreciate these two helping out today. I can't stress enough how nice it is to have them assisting with this. We have 10 presenters with us today. This program is loaded and there's a great variety of topics here. Each presenter will have 5 minutes and 5 slides to discuss their experiences with the soil health topic of their choosing. And we will have a question answer and discussion session at the end. So in the interest of time, we ask that if you have questions and comments for the presenters or the group, that you jot those down or log them in the chat box, and we'll address those after presentations are complete. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. Please keep your microphone muted unless you are talking. And it's always good to put a face to a name, so if you can turn your video on, you're encouraged to do so. If the sound and video get choppy or we start lagging, we may have to mute or eliminate video, but we'll play that by ear. And before I forget, due to the enthusiasm and level of participation for this event, we have just scheduled the Idaho 5 for 5 round 2 for March 4th at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. And after this event, I'll be sending out the announcements and invite an invitation for presenters later on today. So with all of that being said, I think we should get busy here, and we can kick this off this morning with Wendy Pratt. Wendy is a cattle producer from South Eastern Idaho, and her title is Why Cattle?
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Just a sec, I'm getting my, you can hear me and see my slide, right? So you good? We're starting to learn these 5 principles of soil health. And thank you to NRCS for doing that and for sending me this slide. It's great. Keep a living root in the soil for as long as possible, minimize tillage, maximize the number of species, and then keep the soil covered. And then I love this slide because it's got livestock integration is kind of the centerpiece, like it's driving or promoting the other soil principles, soil health principles. So why is that? There was a time, a very long time, that grazing and farming coexisted symbiotically, and herding and cropping actually developed in tandem. They were linked from the very beginnings of agriculture. We know that 8,000 years ago, humans were fertilizing grain crops with animal manure. It was only with the discovery of synthetic fertilizer and its widespread adoption after World War II that we completely, for the most part, divorced animals from farm ground. And as we rely on fertilizer inputs now, we also recognize the drawbacks of that. It's costly, it's finite, it relies on non-renewable fossil fuels to produce. And worst of all, it leaches away too much of it into our air and water. We also know that by using commercial fertilizer, we ignore what's going on underground, that there are these trillions of microscopic organisms that practice an ancient bartering system with plant roots. So we know that plants take carbon dioxide from the air, energy from the sun, and create sugars that plant roots trade for nutrients that these microbes mine from the surrounding soil. The microbes are fed and the plants get what they need. And modern agriculture has short-circuited this natural process.
We are experiencing a few technical difficulties today. I think what we'll do is move on, and up next, and we'll come back to Barry later on in the program. Up next, we have Cathy Wilson with wheat growers, and she's has some stories to present to us about some things going on in the world of wheat production. Cathy, can you kick it off for us? Oh, you're on mute.
You're right. Okay, I'm now. Hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen and we'll just get moving right along here. Maybe. There we go. Okay, let me get this to the slideshow. Oh, let me get the meat. Got to get all the bars out of the way here. Okay. I think we're good now. So I'm Cathy Wilson. I'm the Director of Research for the Idaho Wheat Commission. And many people don't know what the Idaho Wheat Commission does. So let me take a minute to just tell you. We are enabled by the legislature of the state of Idaho to collect a 3.5 cent per bushel assessment on every bushel of wheat that is grown in Idaho at its first point of sale. What we do with that assessment is we reinvest that for the benefit of Idaho's wheat growers. Our mission statement is to maximize profitability for Idaho wheat producers by investing funds in market development, research, communications, and education. And I had the pleasure this summer, because I couldn't be in the field with growers, to really sit back and think about some of the wonderful conversations and stories that I have heard from growers about what sustainability and soil health and all sorts of things like that really mean to them. And it all boils down to one thing, said very clearly by Pat Purdy, and we're going to hear Pat's story in a minute. At the end of the day, it has to be profitable. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about cover crops and grazing, and no-till stubble and organic matter, and cropping systems. So let's hear our first story from Pat. Okay, move through. All right, here we are. This is a picture of Pat Purdy's ranch, a portion of it. And we're going to talk about grazing cover crops to a cash crop. So I met with Pat over the summer, and I saw that he had a cover crop field. We went out to take a look at it, and it was planted with a multi-species cover crop. You can see the picture here. And if you look really close in that corner on the left-hand side of the left-hand picture, you'll see that there are some radishes that are showing up and some other things. And if you look closely at the bottom of that inset, you'll see there is winter wheat. 50% of that cover crop mix was winter wheat. And you'll notice the picture that we had cow-calf pairs grazing on it. Pat's plan was to remove the cattle early enough in the fall that he would be able to get enough biomass back onto the wheat, that as the annuals froze out in the late fall and winter, wheat would have enough growth to have a sturdy crown and to get it through the winter, and hopefully produce a harvestable grain crop in July of this year. So it's really exciting to go back and see how that works out. Joel Peckham and Carmen Wilmore shared some of their concerns with me about this experiment. I just love it when growers take it on themselves to do their own on-farm experiments. So the cattle are obviously grazing, they're fat and happy. Joel pointed out that when cattle are laying down like they are in this picture, it means they're full. They're ready for a siesta. But we also noticed when we looked at that grazing is that they really preferred the winter wheat to vetch, clover, turnips, radishes, and peas, which were also in the mix. Pat wondered what to do about this, and Joel and Carmen suggested shortening up his paddock sizes to concentrate more cattle in a smaller area so that they would hopefully feed evenly and not just prefer the wheat over the other options that they had. I asked if Pat had weighed the cattle, because I think it's pretty common knowledge to people who have looked at the profitability of cover cropping that the real profit margin is in those cattle and the weight gain in them. Well, Pat sort of chuckled and looked down and he goes, well, no, not exactly. We didn't quite have enough time for the cattle guy to get the cattle weighed before they had to get on the field to graze. And I'm not sure we'll have time to weigh them afterwards. And Joel stepped in and Carmen, and they said, yeah, but you know what? We know cattle and we know grazing and we know what happens to weight gain when you compare BLM grazing, where they're eating not that much and they're walking it all off, and grazing cover crops where they're just putting on the weight gain. So I smiled and thought, yeah, these guys aren't scientists, but you know what? They're getting it done. Next, I want to tell you about another grower. A really good friend of mine is Gordon Gallup. Gordon was a wheat commissioner for a long time. And he took the leap into no-till about 30 years ago. He set up the direct seed workshop that the Wheat Commission hosts every year in Eastern Idaho. And he one time said, as he was introducing the conference, he said, well, he said, no-till had to work because I didn't have a plan B. I sold all of my equipment and bought a drill. So I was talking to him in, I think it was about 2017, and he said, hey, Cathy, come here. I want to show you something. And he pulled out 2 pieces of paper out of his notebook. And here they are in this slide. They were soil tests. Now, you probably can't see what I have circled on those 2 pieces of paper, but the important stuff is above each piece of paper. So the soil tests for March 5th, 1985, the organic matter in that field was 1.8 to 1.65%. And 30 years later, on April 27th, 2017, the organic matter was 3.3%. Wow. It was really something to see the unintended, in a way, impact of no-till. So I asked what made Gordon in the first place back in 1985 think about going to no-till, because in 1985, nobody in Eastern Idaho was doing no-till. He was really a pioneer. And again, he kind of smiles and chuckles and he said, hey, you know, it didn't have anything to do with soil structure, soil health, or even erosion control. Honestly, it was a time and money motivated decision. 1 pass over the ground instead of 3. Less time in the tractor, less fuel, and that was going to save me a lot of time and money if it worked. Gordon farms at 6,000 feet, mostly dry land. He has partial water rights for his acres. He says, I have enough surface water to get up a crop in the spring, or if my soil moisture in the spring is good, I can finish out a crop to grain fill in the fall. But he says, I can't do both. But now with the soil structure, organic matter, he can actually have enough water one way or another to usually get a really good crop with his farm. He was also talking about crop rotations. And so I said, well, in 1985, what was your crop rotation? And he said, well, we had barley and wheat and fallow. And I'm thinking to myself, those are cereals. That's not a crop rotation, but didn't say anything, obviously. And then in the present time, he now has, wheat and barley, but also canola, winter pea, and alfalfa. And he mentioned that he feels that that is what has helped him to increase his organic matter. So our next story is going to be back on Gordon's farm, and it has to do with the direct seed workshop again. Gordon and his, that's Gordon and Elton, who is Solberg. He is an agronomist, was brought in to be the keynote speaker that year for the seed conference. And Elton, Gordon and I went out to Gordon's farm just to show, you know, what it looked like the day. And then a snowstorm blew through and it laid down a few inches of snow. At breakfast, Elton said, you know what, do we have time to go back out to the farm and let's just look at the difference between how much snow's on the fallow strips in that trial we were looking at yesterday and how much is on the stubble in the multi-cover crop strip. So it was like, all right, game on. Gordon had a couple of 5-gallon buckets and a drop scale in the back of his truck, and Elton, I don't know how he got it on the plane, but he had a square shovel, and I had a camera and a notebook.
Cathy, so, I hate to interrupt, but you have one more 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's just say it ended up being 2 inches of water that was captured on the multi-cover crop versus the fallow ground. So the third thing I wanted to say is that it's really clear to Idaho growers that we don't grow a crop, that we manage a cropping system. And so here's some quotes from our growers, but I think you get the gist that we have Idaho wheat growers that are going the extra mile to take it upon themselves to farm in a very sustainable way. And sustainable for them means that it's profitable and they can continue farming. Thanks.
And thank you, Cathy. Those were really good. Good stuff. And I think we'll probably have more to talk about in the discussion with that. I do think we've got Barry on. Is that true? Barry, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yep. All right.
You can hear me now? Oh yeah, excellent.
Hear you just fine. Okay. Let me share my screen here.
Tell me when you're ready. You want to give me some? Want me to give some background while you're pulling up slides?
All right. Can somebody confirm that we've got the Barry's slides up here?
Yeah, I'm just gonna stop Cathy's sharing, and then if you want to start sharing, Sean, on your screen with Barry's slide, you should be able to do so.
Okay, do you have the cover slide, Jackie?
Copy that, you look good.
Okay, all right, Barry.
Okay. You ready?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, Barry Duelke, Buhl, Idaho. I run sheep, on my farm under irrigation, under pivot irrigation now on pastures. And so that's my business. That's my livestock enterprise. I transitioned to pivot irrigation about 6 seasons ago now, and I went and basically plowed up some old pastures, chisel, and reseeded. So those seedings comprised early and late orchard grass, Festilolium, which was a cross between fescues and ryegrass that has a short life, 3 to 4 years, and some Italian ryegrass, Crusader in particular, that comes on quick and provided some feed. In addition to that, there was a grazing alfalfa, Alice white clover, and persist red clover, and 2 forbs, chicory and plantain. And so there was a 9-seed mix in there, put in with a no-till drill. My no-till drill is an Atchison. It is not a disc, it's a shoe that has some issues in heavy residue, but that was the way I seeded it. Had a wonderful stand, under pivot, grazed with sheep, rotationally grazed. Our grazing interval, or grazing timing is a day or 2, and the interval, depending upon the season and the time of year, can be anywhere from 40 days up to as long as 70. So at this point in time, after 6 years, chicory and plantain have a 3 or 4 year life. The red clover, the same. White clover doesn't tolerate shading very well, and some of these other grasses have died out because they were just a starter. So I ended up with orchard grass, basically, and grazing alfalfa. They do very, very well here. I do want to mention that perennial ryegrass does not grow here. I'm 4,000 feet, and it just won't survive here. The Italian ryegrass does very well. So I've got orchard grass and alfalfa. I've lost my diversity, and I've been trying to reestablish that diversity in a number of ways and a number of timings, both no-till, broadcast in February time frame, no-till in a variety of time frames across the summer season, grazing season. But part of the problem is the orchard grass is so aggressive and grows so well under this system because this organic matter in these fields are 3 to as high as 5. And I use no chemical fertilizer. So it's an issue of competition. It's an issue of shading. And so I'm trying to find a method, a technique, and a timing to reestablish these things, because in my mind, as I have lost this diversity, I have also lost performance in the lambs in particular. The ewes, they'll do fine. But some of this grass, and there's half of this pivot, so that's over 50 acres. And Jackie's seen it, and so has Linda. It has been waist high or higher on some years. And so grazing management has been an issue. I can't get around it with the numbers, which is about 300, give or take. So I've been struggling with this same thing and spending money on seed with little or no return. Farrah Brummer over in Oregon did some seeding under a pivot for a cattle outfit. Her spring seeding she said was a complete failure. Her late June, July was a success. But the one issue is she didn't come back with those cattle for at least 90 days. But so I'm going to try a little of that. And you can see some of these varieties that I have planted. Barenbrug orchard grass is late. It's very compatible with hay. Takapo is prostrate. It's lower. And so I'm going in with a new one this year that's called Devore, which is also prostrate, and hopefully can deal with some of these shading issues. And a new clover, white clover called Stamina, that looks like it may have promise under this circumstance of mine. So what I'm looking for is people, and I have a couple of friends. I know Brad McIntyre, we've talked about this, but they're in the same situation. They need this feed. They're not in a position to spray it out, start over. And so how do we go about rejuvenating this diversity, which to me, not only in the soil health issues, but the 2 forbs bring up minerals and subsoil minerals, and the plantain has oils that are natural anthelmintic or warmer. So there's tremendous benefits with this, but orchard grass is so at home here, it just dominates. And so that's my issue, that's my problem. And so I'm trying to do that without spraying and starting from scratch. And I'm also trying to do some things. And the other half of this 100-acre pivot, we hay predominantly, but we've got several opportunities to do things. The cover crops is a whole nother topic that we can talk about later that are all targeted to grazing. But maintaining plant diversity in perennial pastures under rotational grazing, intensive rotational grazing, is becoming a challenge. They do fine when you start, but you end up with 3 or 4 basically grasses plus 1 or 2 legumes. So that's the bottom line on that. It is pivot irrigated, and obviously grazing is an issue with shade and establishment. So I don't want to rush it, but I know you're running a little late and you've got other speakers. But if anyone wants to get a hold of me, I'd appreciate it. Sean has my contact information. I'd love your input on your successes and failures. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here. So, okay, if that's good, Barry. Sean, I'll leave it.
All right. Good stuff. Yeah, and you know, we might be able to get back to some of the issues you've talked about with your strategies later on in the discussion. For now, I'll stop the share, and next up we have Steve Hines, and Steve is going to talk with us about interseeding cover crops in corn.
All right, are you seeing slides?
Looks good.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Hines. I'm the County Extension Educator in Jerome County. And this project was done out at the Kimberly Research Farm with a couple of colleagues, Joel Packham, who's the County Educator in Cassia County, and Jason Thomas, who's the County Educator in Minidoka County. And as you can see in the title there, what we looked at is twin rowing corn on a wide center spacing and then interseeding cover crop, primarily to see what we could get for cover crop and also if we could maintain silage yield in doing so. So here's the basics of what we had going. This was a conventionally tilled field. We fertilized it for corn silage to the University of Idaho recommendations. It was irrigated via solid set sprinkler, and we had risers that went up above the corn even when it was at full height. And so very similar to what you would see in a pivot type situation in this country. On May 8th, we planted silage corn. It was a 90-day corn, and it was planted at a 40,000 plants per acre theoretical. Came back in and did row counts later, and it was about 38,500 plants per acre that survived or germinated and grew well anyway. So the treatments that we were looking at, these rows, these plots were 8 rows of corn wide and 230 feet long. So while they were small plot, they weren't tiny little research plots. So the treatment was a standard 30-inch check with no cover crop. So just like you would see, the rows were 30 inches on center. So typical of what you would see of silage corn grown in this area. The next treatment was corn that was twin rows planted on 60-inch centers, and then twin rows that were planted on 44-inch centers. So basically twinning up the either typical 30-inch or 22-inch rows, which are both used pretty regularly in our area here. The cover crop was planted June 24th, and it was a mix of annual ryegrass, radish, yellow sweet clover, red clover, and crimson clover. It was a commercial mix purchased locally from one of the local seed suppliers over in Minidoka County. And I kind of wanted to look at something like if a grower wanted to do this, it was something that they could go and look at. And probably for this next year, I might look at a little bit different kind of a mix. And we planted that on just using a kind of a monkey grinder fertilizer spreader that you put over your neck and shoulder and crank that out there. and that was put on at theoretically 25 pounds to the acre. And then nothing was done to it besides just irrigating it in, which is something for this coming year. I estimated that only about 50% of that seed even germinated. So this next year, I'm going to try and set up a rotary hoe. So after we plant, we can come in and just kind of tickle that soil surface just a little bit to try and get a little bit better seed and soil contact there. I think would do better. We chemicated with uran for nitrogen on July 27th. And then on September 18th, we harvested the center 4 rows of the 8 row plots. So looking here at up here, I don't know if you can see my cursor there on the top left. That is the 60-inch on center. So you can see these are twin rows of corn, and then the cover crop is in between. We had come in and cut out the ends, and we were getting ready to run the harvester through. Over on the top right is the cover crop, or the corn that is on 44-inch twin rows, and you can see not quite as much sunlight in between the 44-inch as there is in the 60-inch. And you can see up here these pictures on the inset. This photo was taken probably about 9:30 in the morning, and so didn't have good direct sunlight coming from the top, but you can see a lot of sun getting down in there as compared to this standard 30-inch corn down here. Really nothing growing in between. Of course, we didn't seed anything, and not a lot of sunlight as compared to some of these up here. And then here on the lower right hand, I'm just showing you the harvest equipment. This is a 2-row harvester that we borrowed from the USDA-NRCS across the road there at Kimberly. And this poor little 60 horsepower tractor had all it could do to handle harvesting 2 rows of this corn.
Steve, you've got 30 seconds.
Okay, this picture here was taken in October 10th. And so you can see the 60-inch rows here, or no, the 60-inch rows were here, 44-inch rows were here, the 30-inch rows down here. All I'm trying to show you here is that in the middle of October, there was something to graze in these up here, and this soil is armored, and it stayed armored all winter. I was out just the first day of February, so earlier this week, and took some pictures. This has something on it. This here is still bare and naked and afraid, and, you know, as Marlon likes to say in his presentations. So quickly, the results. On treatment 1, which was the check, 30.1 ton. Treatment 2, which was the 60-inch centers, 27 ton. And treatment 3, which was the 44-inch centers, was 34.7 ton. So what that's showing, and I was rather quite surprised that the 60-inch rows were a little bit less in tonnage there. There were some reasons for that in this particular plot, but even so, the 44-inch stuff really did a nice job. Now, if you look down here quickly, treatment 2, of course, we didn't interseed treatment 1, so there's no cover crop yield. So treatment 2 averaged 5 ton per acre as fed. So if you grazed half of that, there'd have been about 2.5 tons as fed available there when that silage corn came off. And treatment 3, the 44-inch rows, was about 3.2 tons. So the 60-inch rows produced enough as fed forage there as it kind of lost in the yield. But again, we are going to do this a second year out there this year and see how that compares. So with that, I'll quit.
All right. Thank you, Steve. That was excellent. I like the idea that soil's coming out of the crop production with some armor on it, and your soil resources being protected. Neil Crescenti is up next, and he's with the Nature Conservancy, and he's going to be talking about growing a demonstration farm. Neil, can you take it away?
I can, or at least I'll try.
All right, I can see your slides. There we go. Looks
All
good.
right, great. Well, thanks everyone. Good morning. My name is Neil Crescenti. I'm the Agriculture Program Manager for the Nature Conservancy here in Idaho. Also with us today is Brad Johnson. He's our Farm Strategies Manager. He's going to be talking a little bit more later on about some of our field experience the past year. And so my presentation is going to focus a little bit more high level, provide you an overview about our work in regenerative agriculture and soil health, and some of the strategies we're looking at there. For those that aren't super familiar with the Nature Conservancy, we are a global conservation organization. We work across America in all 50 states and in 72 countries. In Idaho, we've been working on conservation outcomes for about 55 years now. And historically, a lot of this work is centered around land conservation. But about 8 years ago, the organization looked at what are the biggest challenges facing nature and people. And in particular, what are those opportunities where we can make significant gains? So agriculture, and specifically soil health, was identified as a key area where we could achieve considerable conservation outcomes while supporting food production, as well as economic benefits for producers. For Idaho TNC, our theory of change with respect to soil health is that if we can demonstrate and communicate the environmental and economic benefits of soil health practices, then we can help catalyze a widespread adoption and achieve some of these environmental outcomes that we're after, including soil health, improved water quality, water supply, and carbon reductions. So I think, as we're all familiar, and certainly some of these presentations kind of speak to this, is that we've heard a lot in the literature and the media about the importance and the benefits of soil health. But we still see, low adoption rates of a lot of these practices, and a lot of a lot of these fellow presentations show is that a lot of that those barriers to wider spread adoption is the fact that a lot of these practices that have been identified really need to be tailored to individual regions and even specific farms. So for a producer, there's a lot of risk and uncertainty associated with that adoption time. So one way TNC is looking to try and lower those barriers and achieve that wider spread adoption is through a program and strategy that we're starting, which is called demonstration farms. And so what these are is we're going to work with private operators and partner with them to explore some of these practices on their farms while providing them both financial and knowledge support to try and reduce some of that risk as well as that adoption time. And we're calling these demonstration farms because they're really intended to be living classrooms. So we want other producers, other advisors to be able to do field tours and field days where they can see these processes through their life cycle, ask questions, and also share their own experiences with what they're seeing out there. And so this spring we'll be starting our first demonstration farm project. It's located just outside of Twin Falls. We really like this location because there's easy access to it. So when we do field days, COVID pending, there'll be easy access for folks to visit. The producer we're working with has been using no-till and minimum till practices for a number of years now, but we're going to be working with him to explore some of these other practices and kind of create a more holistic system. We're going to start with 30 acres in our first year, and depending on how those practices go, and if we're successful, he'd like to expand that even to 60 acres. So we're pretty excited about that. There's several partners on this project and on our demonstration projects. For this one in particular, we are working with NRCS and the University of Idaho, and we've also been communicating with some corporate partners in the ag sector to provide some additional funding and even some resource support for this project. We're hoping to start some field tour days as early as this spring and summer, so we'll keep you informed of when those are happening. But certainly if folks have questions about the field days, the demonstration farm program, or even just our soil health program overall at TNC, please feel free to reach out to myself or Brad, and we'll happy to chat with you. And with that, I'd just like to thank everyone for their time, and thanks, Sean, for pulling this all together.
All right, thank you, Neil. That's great. I really believe in that concept with the demonstration farm. I think you guys are doing a good thing there. Moving right along, we have next up Mary Wolf with the Aberdeen Plant Materials Center to be talking to us about their warm season cover crop trial. Mary. All right.
Thank you, Sean. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm Mary Wolf. I'm the agronomist at the Aberdeen, Idaho Plant Materials Center. And today I'm going to talk about a trial that we did last summer. And we evaluated different warm season cover crops for Idaho. And in case you don't know about us, we're part of the NRCS, and our job here is to look for plant-based solutions to natural resource problems. The purpose of this study, like I said, was to evaluate the adaptation of various warm season cover crops to Idaho, with the goal of having people be able to use the results of this study to plan successful warm season cover crop mixes. And this study is just getting wrapped up right now. We plan to publish the results online later on this year, so stay tuned. And now my slide doesn't want to forward. Sorry, guys. Oops, that was too much. Okay, I'm just going to start that over. Here we go. Why is this happening?
Do your arrow keys work to advance the slide?
No, they're not working. Okay, here we go. I'm not sure what I did, but this is where I want to be. So this study was planted on June 2nd of 2020. There were, I'm not going to read you the whole list. I think you can probably see it okay, but there were 3 broad categories: broadleafs, grasses, and legumes. I would like to point out that under the broadleaf category, there were there was a subcategory of brassicas. The safflower that we planted was spineless safflower, which can be grazed. And I put in some of the grain crops. I put in both a winter and a summer just to see how the two would compare. I figure it's so cool here early in the season. I just wanted to see what would happen. And what we evaluated were emergence, so how well it came out of the ground, the date of when each species reached 50% bloom, the percent cover of the ground at that point, and then at that same point, we collected biomass, and that's something we're going to be sending to the lab pretty soon to get the forage value on it. And I should point out, this was all done as replicated plots. It was irrigated with about 22 inches of water through a sprinkler and about 2.5 inches of precipitation from the beginning of June till the end of August. And I'd also like to point out at this point that we're not advocating single species cover crops. This is just, we tried them one at a time just to see what they were doing. We really encourage developing cover crop mixes. I don't know why I'm doing this over and over again.
You can just show it this way, Mary.
Can you see it okay?
Yeah, you've only got about a minute left, so just do it this way.
Oh, okay. All right, so here's, see this red line across? That's percent cover at 50% bloom. It's 60% is the red line, and you can see that most of these cover crops filled in quite nicely. This is, I think, more of an important slide, which is the yellow line is 4,000 pounds per acre of dry matter. So you see, we got some good biomass on these in spite of kind of ridiculous weed pressure. The orange circles, those are the ones that did really well, over 4,000 pounds. That was African cabbage, beardless spring barley, common vetch, graza radish, hubam, which is annual white sweet clover, spineless safflower, spring triticale, and sunflower. And like I said, the forage value is coming. And so this is just kind of an overview of what was a winner in 2020 and what was a loser in 2020. Good things that had good emergence and high biomass were triticale, beardless spring barley, hubam sweet clover, common vetch, fava bean, the graza forage radish, safflower, sunflower, and African cabbage. And the 2020 losers, I don't think these might necessarily be losers every year. I think the reason that they did very poorly was we had cold early season temperatures here in Aberdeen. So at night it was getting down to about 33 degrees. And a lot of things just didn't do well, like the soybean didn't even emerge at all. Soybean, mung bean, cowpea, chickpea, American vetch, grazing corn, which I know has done well for people around here, and all the sorghums and sorghum Sudans perform poorly. If anyone has any questions about this, or you want to bug me about when am I going to get this report online, there's my contact information, marywolf@usda.gov, and I'd be happy to answer your questions or help you if you're looking for some assistance coming up with a cover crop mix, or if you have some ideas of what you'd like to see happen in the future. We're your PMC and would be happy to help. And with that, thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary. That was a great presentation. Loads of good info there. All right, moving on, we've got Marlon. Marlon Winger is our regional point of contact from the Soil Health Division, and he's going to be talking about implementing the principles of diversity. Take it away, Marlon.
You might still be on mute, Marlon.
Marlon, we've got your, there you go. Are you unmuted?
Okay.
Now?
Hey,
right.
Thank you. I just wanted to let you know that we published and produced 12 YouTube videos showcasing 7 Idaho soil health innovators, mostly in South Eastern Idaho. And Sean has now got that site on the NRCS soil health site, how to start the no-till journey. Because I live in Wyoming, squeaky wheel gets the grease. Just wanted to share a couple little success stories. Been working with many producers in Wyoming. One of them, Jeff Boardman in Gillette, Wyoming. We're standing in the field, top left. 2020 was a terrible dry year. The cover crop mix only produced 1,500 pounds of biomass, which we were all discouraged about. But Jeff said, you know, it's not all bad because across the fence, the alfalfa grass hay mix produced 0 pounds of hay. We've been working for Jeff for 3 or 4 years now on no-till and cover crops. This same field that we're standing in that only produced 1,500 pounds in 2019 produced 10,000 plus pounds of biomass. So we know that these systems will work. We just need a little favorable moisture. Been working in Buffalo, Wyoming, like I have been in Idaho in years past. We're in the middle field there, the middle picture. This is our 3rd classroom presentation and first field day. And this is what this grower got with 1 irrigation, about 2 inches of water. So it was really fun. Another little town we're working in is Moorcroft, Wyoming. This is their first year. A 2-hour presentation, 2 hours in the field. Mostly in Wyoming, we're working with how to regenerate old decadent hay fields using the 5 principles of soil health. And I just want to make a comment that the principles of soil health are universal and they work. How you implement them is going to be a little different on your operation. Because I haven't been teaching as much, I worked a little bit on updating a cover crop periodic table, and Mary had most of these planted in her plots. So I encourage everybody to utilize her. She brings great things to the state of Idaho. Cool season plants on the left, warm season plants on the right. In my Word document, you can click on the word Facilia, and you get 3 or 4 pictures of Facilia, 5 or 6, 7 different bullet statements. You can click on flax. You can see about 82,000 seeds per pound, upright vertical growth. Plant is very fibrous. Stems provide lasting armor. Of course, the flowering is beneficial to insects. You can click on German millet, about 180,000 plants, seeds per acre, excuse me. Not the highest yielding, but one of the better forage quality of the millets, and of course, no prussic acid. So hopefully we'll be able to post this on a few sites around the West. I think one of the greatest things I enjoy with my job is working with soil health innovators around the Intermountain West. This is Chris Unruh near Grandview, Idaho. He's a Timothy hay grower. So in a couple of these pivots, he cuts first crop Timothy for the export market. And I do need to mention he's working with the Nature Conservancy District on this. So great partners those guys are. Chris planted about 100,000 corn seeds on 60-inch rows with his no-till planter. And on the end of his planter, he put some 4-H peas in so that we could see, so he could see what peas did. And certainly it almost doubled some of the corn biomass when it was planted on near those rows. He also planted pinto beans, a warm season legume down the middles on the 30-inch, but they didn't do as well. They did mature. They had some pretty good pods on them, but Chris was really impressed with the peas because they're a cool season plant and they weren't hurt by the first couple of frosts at all.
30 seconds.
Just wanted to share a little bit about planting interseeding corn in Logan, Utah. They worked with 10 producers, 300 acres, about 18 pounds to the acre, $30 per acre. Just in wrapping up, working with Jake Bowler in Wyoming, regenerating 250 acres of worn out hay, planted a diverse 10-way cover crop mix. His first year, he purchased a no-till drill by selling his hay equipment. He told us the cost of his cow cost, his benchmark condition was $550 a cow, with the diverse cover crop mix and winter grazing was $150 per cow. We planted brown midrib, Sudan grass, and German millet together in part of the crop rotation. And on the right-hand side, this is one of Jake's goals. Cover crops can be a win-win for soil health and for the producers, bottom line. Jake's main goal is to get rid of putting up hay. And I stole this quote from Cameron Williams. It says, real progress toward profitability comes not from reducing the cost of a practice, but rather from eliminating the need for the practice. Now that's a mouthful there, but thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Marlon. That was a whirlwind tour and loads of good things going on. We appreciate what you do. Next up, we have Brad McIntyre from McIntyre Farms talking to us about diversity at McIntyre Farms. Brad. All right, I see it.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep, looks good.
All right, so yeah, Brad McIntyre here over here in Caldwell, Idaho. Just share quickly a few things that we did. So one of the on-farm trials, we did a 30-inch row corn, 3 rows on and then 2 rows off. So right at 4 days later, I blocked off rows on my no-till drill and went up every space that we had left off, so those 2 rows. And then on my harvester, I'm sure everyone's trying to figure out what I did here. On the harvester, I have an 8-row head, and so I created with old mud flaps, I created blanks to just push the cover crop down for those middle 2 rows. And so when I turned, I was able to skip the next 2 rows. So you actually only harvested about 4/5 of the field instead of the whole field, because you were able to skip rows. And so my combine was able to straddle that, so I never ran on any cover crop at harvesting time. And we were able to have a real diverse mix up the middle. The cover crop by the end was almost as tall as the corn. I just threw every miscellaneous bag of seed I had in my shop. I put it in the mix. So I had vegetables, all kinds of, there was squash and warm season grasses and legumes. I mean, there's everything out there. And so some of it went to seed, it got mature, but I just wanted to see what happened with everything. On the yield, we ended up getting 100. We planted it late. It got planted towards the end of, about the later end of May. So it was later than normal. It was a short season, 91-day corn. It still went 185 bushel. There was one side where and it was under handline irrigation as well. So there was one section where the handlines were closer, and that area actually did 225 bushel as I was going up it with the combine. So maybe a little bit of lack of water as it was going through there, but the actual soil health of that area exploded. The soil became, I mean, it was just alive. Marlon was out there. We had a couple of people out there, looking through, and it was pretty amazing. And the cattle, they stayed out there a long time. There's still a huge cover there, but I already had pulled them off. So that was one of the experiments we did this year. This was up in the pivot off that corner. I interseeded vetch with triticale seed and also with some brassica seed. I harvested them together. The triticale actually outcompeted the vetch quite a bit when we went to harvest. There wasn't, maybe between 5 and 10%, but it was probably closer to 5% vetch on the harvest. Vetch shells out real easy. On the brassica side, we got a lot more out of that side, and so vetch is really hard to produce seed with. But when I combined it with the brassica, it came together better. And what you're looking down there on the right is actually a pivot track, because there's no way to walk in there. It ended up being 7 foot tall. It was insane, the biomass, and we got a really big seed production off of that side. The triticale was marginal. This is that same field. Tons of vetch came back, a lot of brassica, but we planted some grasses in there and some warm seasons to try to get the carbon up. But it was still pretty high. You can see on the right, that's a wormhole. It was pretty large. It was almost as big as about my pinky probably. And all the nodules in that vetch, and we grazed it, still a bunch of vetch coming back. And so that'll probably be out there forever. But with us having animals in the rotation, I don't see that as a negative thing. On our animal side, we added meat ducks to the rotation this year. So this is the houses that we had them in, they were able to go outside of the house, but that's where the food and water was. We started a couple years ago building our newest egg mobiles and finished them up this spring. And so those houses will hold between 800 and 1,000 hens, and it has everything on board with a central egg collection. You collect in one spot out the back. And so that's what the laying hens, that's their current condominium. We changed our meat bird houses. in the industry, most people pull their houses lengthwise, and these Cornish cross birds don't walk very well. And so as they get to the end, they always stop and they're tired of walking. These houses are 60 feet long by 15 feet wide. So we had the thought, why not turn it around and make them walk 15 feet and just pull them widthwise and have walking problems. We never had to touch a bird. And in the past, we'd move almost every bird every day. So that is the things that happen on our farm. And this is a farm that we rented. And I just like to maybe not rub it on their face, but what can happen in 1 year with soil health. That was the year before as our cover crop that we had there at the end of our cash crop. And on the right is the next spring after they tilled it up and tried to plant onions into it. That is what it looked like. So that is all from McIntyre Farms in 2020. Thanks for the chance.
Wow, thank you, Brad. Lots of good stuff there. And those chickens are impressive. There's a lot of them. Getting out on that field with the tail, you're rotating the cattle, and those things started pouring out of there and coming after us. It was like a river of chickens coming towards us.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So thank you, Brad. And up next we have Alayne Blickle talk to us about composting and rotational grazing for horses. And Alayne's with Sweet Pepper Ranch around Nampa.
Great, thank you. And so I assume that you can see my presentation and hear me okay, Sean?
It looks good, and you're coming through loud and clear.
Great. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we compost and apply compost to our pastures. And our place is Sweet Pepper Ranch, as Sean said, and we're in Nampa. And we do boarding and lessons and clinics, and we have a small scale guest ranch and a bed and breakfast when there's not COVID, and a horse motel. And we do all of that with conservation practices and trying to be as sustainable as possible. And I'm also an educator, and I work with horse and livestock owners teaching conservation practices like manure management, mud management, pasture management, using native plants. Well, in this last picture, actually, what I wanted to say is that we pick up all manure on our place every day from stalls and paddocks and confinement areas and arenas. And then we compost it. And we have 3 bins that we use to compost. And we fill up 1 bin at a time, and we water it to try to keep it damp. Especially during the dry season. And then when it's finished composting, we kind of stockpile it at the end. And then we spread it on the pastures, primarily in the early spring and late fall. And we have about 6 acres of pasture at our place. And we hay it. We hay it 2 or 3 times a year. Plus we do rotational grazing with our horses on it. We don't ever keep our horses on it year round. We don't graze on it in the winter time to avoid compacting the soil. And we work really hard to not ever graze below about 3 to 4 inches. So when we rotationally graze it, we just have temporary fencing in a small paddock kind of area. And for the time that the horses are on it each day, they just are in this area. And then when it gets grazed down about 3 to 4 inches, then we move it on. So we do the rotational grazing and haying concurrent on our pastures during the summer. And then we also apply compost to other areas, which doesn't use that much compost, but in the fall, we put compost on all of our garden beds and garden areas, as well as on our lawns. And we use it that way as well. And then we're also looking at options for either giving it away or selling it, because we're right about at our limit as far as the carrying capacity for our pastures. We have 13 horses and 6 acres of pasture. So we produce a really good compost product. The top layer looks a little less composted than right underneath the top, like 4 to 6 inches. It's really well composted. So I'd really like to be able to, sell it at least to cover costs, but we do a lot of giving it away. And right there, we're just using our old feed bags to bag up compost to give to some of our friends. So that's just a quick summary. And that's my contact information there. My business is Horses for Clean Water. And that's where I teach. And I also write for different equestrian publications on land management practices. And then our place is Sweet Pepper Ranch in Nampa. And that's it.
All right. Thank you, Alayne. Appreciate that. That's interesting and good to hear from a operation about horses. Okay, Brad Johnson with TNC is our last presenter. Are you with us, Brad? There he is.
Yep. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay, good deal. I will see if I can share my screen here. Okay. All right. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep, looks good, Brad.
Okay. All right. Good morning. My name is Brad Johnson. Today, I'm going to talk about planting green in Shoshone, Idaho. This is one of the examples of our work in TNC's Healthy Soils Clean Water initiative that Neil was talking about. I'll share some of those practices in action along with some lessons we learned. My hope is we can spark up some conversation in the questions and answer. First, a little bit about me. I grew up farming up at the Palouse, north of Moscow. Spent my whole career in ag. Farmed in Twin Falls for a while. Went to my in-laws' cattle ranch in Salmon, and then I was a crop consultant for a fertilizer company here in Idaho Falls. But my passion for soil health and soil conservation brought me to the Nature Conservancy. Yeah, let's see if I can change the slide. There we go. So the soil health practice we tested was planting pinto beans in the living rye that was royal or crimped for termination the day of planting at Fred and Cooper Brossi's farm in Shoshone, Idaho. And then I'll also talk about some grazing corn into triticale at Ray Robinson's farm in Burley that we were partnered with David Mabey in the NRCS and also Agrosource in Burley. In my opinion, this is kind of the holy grail of regenerative farming. Oop, lost my place. This is no-till organic, soil's covered at all times, and we're maximizing the amount of time that living root is in the soil. The guys in the East, they've been doing this pretty frequently, but as far as I know, it hasn't been done very much at all in the West, maybe once or twice. If anybody in participation today has done this, please let us know in the chats. We'd love to talk to you about it. As part of the TNC's Healthy Soils Clean Water initiative, TNC helped backstop the financial risk and provided advice when the Brossies needed it. This was a collaborative effort with Nature Conservancy, Fred and Cooper Brossi, and Rich Bupp at Earthnosis in Twin Falls area. And this here is a picture of Fred using his roller crimper for the very first time. It was a pretty exciting day. The rye was planted September 25th through the 27th of 2019 following potatoes. Approximately 90 pounds per acre were planted using a John Deere 1590 no-till drill. We produced roughly, Rich Bupp took some clipped biomass tests and figured it at 51,000 pounds per acre, 2.5 million stems per acre. Cooper and Fred planted the beans, on May 29th, and we rolled and planted on the same day. Here, this picture of Cooper holding up the rye stem. It doesn't the picture doesn't show it very well, but we did have a good crimp. You can see that one there, and then there's another one off to the right of it. So we did have 2, sometimes more crimps per plant, and the rye was at anthesis. Bean seeding, they were shooting for 75 to 100,000 plants per acre, and they only had about an average of 56,000 plants per acre emerged, in some areas a lot less than that. So they replanted on June 27th and July 1st with 145 pounds of raw seed. They estimated about 130 pounds of live seed, and it grew, but it froze very, very hard in the fall several times. At harvest, Rossi's swathed the beans. Cooper says it's pretty dang important to follow the direction of the crimping with the combine. It makes a mess if you don't. The beans only yielded 524 pounds per acre of clean pintos, but we also got 400 pounds of rye seed per acre. So it didn't do very well. You can see in this slide, though, the ground is completely covered and is to this day. I was out there last week and it's still totally covered. In Burley, we did this same thing, but we planted grazing corn into living triticale. This time we used the roller crimper that TNC owns. It is a straight paddle crimper, so that the paddles are straight instead of the chevron pattern. They work, but I would recommend the chevron pattern like the Rossi's. It is a much smoother ride and doesn't till up the soil quite as much. This stand of triticale that we planted into is managed for silage, so the stand was extremely thick and tall. I think I heard the rest of the field that they did chop yielded 25 tons the acre. We only terminated about a half an acre of that field. And the corn kind of did like the beans, very minimal growth. We never did do a stand count to see exactly how good it was, but we did have great weed control. And to me, it seemed like the triticale died a little bit better than the rye at the Rossi's, and I don't know why that would be, to be honest. They were all both at anthesis and everything. Some of the lessons learned, first and foremost, is we all know in this group, innovation requires trial and error, and these lessons are all part of the learning process. I do think we learned that this is doable. We just need to tweak a few things. In either plot, we didn't disturb the biomass in the seed row at all. So maybe going forward, we should probably do that a bit better, maybe a wavy culture out front. Maybe the wider row spacing of a planter would have been better. That way we probably could have cleaned out that row a little bit more. However, that will allow weeds into that row. In an organic system, that could be difficult. Maybe we needed to stress the rye a little bit before or after termination. Rossi's are thinking maybe we watered that rye back to life because the growing point is still alive, still growing out there. They did try strip directly into the rye without rolling it, and I don't think any beans came up in that. And we also did that with corn and saw the same thing. To me, the biggest issue is seed epigenetics. The seed we're using around here has been grown on a conventional farm, bare soil, perfect seed beds, everything fed to it that it needs. And we're asking a ton out of the seed, and it doesn't know how to handle being planted at the normal soil depth, plus getting through 3 or 4 inches of thick biomass. And a lot of it just petered out and couldn't make it. I know Fred and Cooper are working with a seed breeder, a bean seed person in the Twin Falls area. So we'll kind of follow that and see what we come with. They're kind of needing some help getting that project started. If anybody has any funding ideas, please let us know, because that is what's needed to make that happen right now. So with that, I think we'll take these lessons. We'll make some adjustments and continue to test these ideas at the demonstration farms that Neil was talking about. And if anybody's interested in TNC's Healthy Soils Clean Water Initiative, please call myself or Neil. We're very excited to assist any grower or group in their pursuit of soil health and water conservation. So I think I came up short because I talked super fast, but that's all I got.
Thanks, Brad. That was really, really good. And I think this type of assistance and experimentation is really useful for folks. Before we were to move on to general discussion and question and answer, I think we have Wendy Pratt on, and if she would like to finish her presentation. I know we'd had some technical difficulties there. We can certainly do that now. Wendy, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks.
All right.
There we go. I was just, why isn't it? Oh, I'm there. I'm good. Okay. I was just comparing the difference between synthetic fertilizer and animal manure. And I think I was just to the point where this is because the cow is cycling forage, it's mostly organic matter, which we know builds soil structure. It increases water infiltration and retention. And it gets those microbial, this life. There's more numbers and there's more activity from her contribution. And just think about the fact that we know we want a diversity of plants, but we also want a diversity of animals and insects. And that's what this cow adds, this layering of species. She adds her own microbiome as she grazes. Besides manure, she produces up to 50 quarts a day of saliva, which has its own beneficial properties, and 6 liters a day of urine, which is just brimming with macro and micronutrients. It's good for earthworms. It even has a disinfectant type of property. If you're around cows much, you know that they also attract birds and flying insects. So, gosh, this notion of terminating cover crops, let's do it with cows if we can, instead of herbicide or tillage. My last 2 slides just show that there's still a lot of resistance to putting cows on farms, and all the fences are gone in our area. But we can bring on some temporary pound-in posts, string that's rolled out by hand. It's electrified by a portable energizer. We can create paddocks to control time. We can fence out the center of a pivot with this. We can bring on our own portable water troughs, and then it all goes home with us. This is just moving with a pivot, and that's just a string that's electrified, and so every couple of days we can just move the pivot and move the cows with it. I just want to close by saying these grazing projects have to be profitable for both the farmer and the rancher, of course, but so they need to be designed in partnerships. It's, as we've said, it's not a silver bullet. It's trial and error. It's science, but it's also an art. And we need to be committed to these long range results and take advantage of layering of enterprises. And this is good for our ag communities. It means more profitability, more stability, more resiliency. And that's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Wendy. I think there's more folks getting interested in bringing livestock back into the operations. So yeah, excellent stuff. All right. I know that there were some questions that folks were getting to in the chat.
So the first question that I've been sort of keeping track, so if we go all the way back to Cathy Wilson's presentation, there's a question asked about, if she's still on, how did the winter wheat do after grazing? Did it yield well? Maybe she's not on.
Nope, I'm here.
Okay.
Sorry, couldn't get to my mic there. Well, we don't know the answer to that yet. We will know sometime in June or July of this year. So this is in process right now, and we'll have to see how it works.
Great. There was also the comment made, and I just thought I would say it out loud in case people aren't reading the chat. But in response to Mary Wolf's presentation, there were 4 cover crop types that were used. soybeans, cowpea, mung bean, and chickpea that regular people cannot plant in Idaho due to Idaho's bean rules. But because they're with the government and are they're trying to look ahead for if that rule ever changes and the restrictions are lessened. But just as a reminder, you can't really plant soybeans, cowpeas, mung beans, and chickpeas. And it looks like there's a really great conversation going on in the chat about that.
Guar is another one.
Guar.
Yeah, and Linda, I'll add, this is Brad McIntyre. Me and Marlon Winger are working on a project right now down here in the Treasure Valley of trying to produce some of that seed in the state. There's rules if you can get it produced in the state under certain conditions, it can then be sold in the state, and it takes quite a few years of getting that to that point. But it's a big project. If anybody's interested in working with us or whatever, we're trying to figure out how to get some of those seeds that we can produce in Idaho going.
Great.
Linda, kind of couple onto that, from the bean school last week, we had Cathy on there from Idaho Crop Improvement. My understanding was, we can grow those crops as long as all of that seed is inspected and has a phytosanitary certificate that other bean seed in Idaho would, and that would have to go through Department of Ag or Idaho Crop Improvement. And the entire lot of seed would have to be tested, not just a small sample. The flip side of that is that if the seed is grown in Idaho, as I understand it, and inspected, then it could be used as well. So that might be the end there. Maybe Brad, that you're kind of looking at.
Yes, that's correct. The problem with bringing seed in and getting the whole lot tested is any grower that has that in their field, if there is a problem found with any of those seeds during that year that they're growing it out, it has to be inspected 3 different times. That field has to be plowed. That's the terminology and the rules, is it has to be plowed under immediately, not harvested, nothing. It's plowed. And so as no-till farmers, that's a big no-no for us. And so we're trying to figure out how to raise it, inspect it, and have it as sellable seed, so the state isn't out of all of, there's a lot of species that we just can't use.
Hey, Brad. What if TNC grew some of the seed to get some seed banks going on a demo farm? We could pay for the testing and all that good stuff, at least to get a seed bank started that is tested to be free of all these diseases they're afraid of.
Yeah, it's going to take some partnership for sure. Marlon's got a little bit of money on a grant. But first year we have to start with furrow irrigation. You can't do any overhead. Second year can be overhead irrigation. So reach out to me or Marlon, and we can include everyone that is interested in these conversations going forward.
Yeah, we have on this demo farm in Twin Falls, we do have a gravity irrigated, furrow irrigated pivot corner that we could grow this stuff on.
No, that'd be good.
Brad McIntyre, while you're still here, there was a question that was asked, I think it was just privately, but it said, what inspired the 3-2 corn row spacing? Was it so you could use hand lines, combine wheelbase? What was the thought process?
I had seen negative and positives on the 60-inch corn. And so, I don't know, it just hit me one day that yes, on my corners where I have a hand line running up it gives me more space for that water to get out. It provides way more sunlight to the ground. The other thing that we had toyed with doing, but we didn't do, is running chicken tractors up that space, because it'd be a lot wider than a 60-inch planting. We never did that. Somebody could do that, but I was just trying to see. And on a 60-inch, we actually had more ground space planted versus 60s with the 3 on 2 off. But that middle row, when I moved all those seeds over, that middle row was suffering pretty bad because it was planted so thick. But we're going to try it again. But it worked great for hand lines on a corner. Worked very well.
On that subject of corn, I got a question for Steve Hines. Steve, are there other studies out there that kind of concur with that spacing that had the best yield? You had was it 40 or 44 inch spacing that outperformed the others? I'm not hearing anything.
How about now?
Okay. All right.
Yeah, most of the studies that I've read have been on 60-inch rows, and they've been in grain corn. And one of the problems that we had with the 60 on centers was we were at the research farm, and so you're following whatever chemical concoction the study before you put down, right? And so for whatever reason, 2 of the 4 reps on that 60-inch centers were very low yielding. And so that really affected it. But even so, if I'd have thrown out those 2, the 2 highest were still 29 ton. So probably would have not been statistically significant at that point. But we will see this next year when I replicate that study.
The amount of forage that was there was pretty impressive too. It's got to look kind of exciting for somebody that wants to incorporate livestock, huh?
Yeah, and I got to believe that if I can figure out how to work that seed in just a little bit better, that we could do a lot better on the forage production there, or at least the coverage. And I think Steve Schuyler was on this meeting. I don't know if he still is, but I need to get a hold of Steve and have him go out there with me and measure what the percent of soil cover is. And because I think that would be interesting data to have as well.
You bet. Thanks.
Hey, this is Marlon. Just a comment. When I visited Brad's cover crop interseeding the corn, because he had quite a few warm season cover crops planted in there, it was a jungle. And that's one thing I would have suggested to the Utah folks. Their whole mix was cool season species. And I think to increase a little bit of biomass, they could have added some warm season grass to their mix.
Folks have mentioned timing, and timing seems to be a big deal. That's something Barry was interested in reestablishing some diversity. And I know he was interested in if anyone had some comments about his operation and reestablishing the diversity and the timing of the seeding.
Just a comment for Barry. I've seen Cameron Williams in Soda Springs drill in red clover, and I've seen Brad McIntyre drill in some red clover in their pastures. But I think you got to get it, if I remember right, you got to get that planted late in the fall when the grass is not really actively growing. So it gives that chance for that perennial legume to get established. But both Brad and Cameron have had pretty good luck interseeding clovers, red clover in the pasture system.
Hey, Marlon, so you're aware out at Unruh's, those cows are still out there in that mix. They are supplementing a little bit with some silage, but those cows are still grazing out there.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, that was a tearjerker for me, Brad, and I appreciate TNC's work with these innovative producers. That was a fantastic first year project. And I think the thing that Chris come home with was, I'm going to plant peas between the corn rows for that nitrogen sharing ability, because it was impressive. But yeah, I think he really hit a systems approach there by increasing diversity on a monoculture Timothy hay operation.
Yeah, last I talked to him, he's got even bigger plans for next year. He just hasn't elaborated what those are just yet.
When I was talking to Chris, I said, boy, we need to come out and have another field tour at his place. He had one years ago when Gabe Brown came to Idaho, but boy, if he does that Timothy project again, we should have a little field tour out there. Maybe we'll be wearing triple masks, but it's probably worth the tour.
Yeah, we should plan that for this summer. It's pretty central location for a lot of the Snake River Plain.
So that was all the questions that were asked in the chat. But you may, people may have written down some questions that they wanted to ask any of the speakers. So feel free to unmute and ask those questions or throw them up in the chat, and I'll keep monitoring it.
I also want to mention before I forget to just a few things that I pasted into the chat box there. There's Marlon had talked about those videos featuring some Idaho producers and soil health stories, and there's a link to those. And Cathy had posted a link about an article called "Leaving It Better Than I Found It," and that discusses some of the things that some of the wheat growers are doing, and that's a really good article. So those links are in there for anyone that wants them. And then the Idaho 5 for 5 round 2, March 4th at 11 a.m. The invite and the flyer will go out here shortly. I just want to shamelessly plug that and put it on everybody's radar. This is a lot of fun, a lot of great information, and I think we're going to have another good one. So I know there's already people that are interested in presenting.
If I can bring something up, Sean, is that?
Oh yeah, time? You bet.
So Tyson Coles just asked a question in the chat, and to me, it's a very, very important one. He has a piece of CRP ground out by Gordon Gallops that's coming out soon. He wants to try to do it. Sorry if I'm speaking for you, Tyson, but he'd like to do it without tillage. Does anybody have any experience with that, or anybody want to start a discussion on that? Crickets.
If I remember right, one of the extension services in the Midwest had a bulletin or some information on it. Obviously, it's for the Midwest and not here, but it could be a starting point. If I can find it, I'll send it your way. Because this was a pretty big topic, maybe 7 or 8 years ago.
This is Cathy Wilson. I'd just like to say that there are a number of growers there in the Swan Valley that have done that. And my suggestion would be to contact Gordon Gallup. He knows everybody and he's been there 30 years. And he's a guy who would love to share his knowledge and resources with someone who's exploring no-till.
I speak to Gordon quite a bit, Cathy, and I agree. He's awesome. Does a great job no-till. And I actually asked him this question, and he told me he did it once and will never do it again.
Well, he's honest too.
Yeah, he is very honest.
Another person that I know that has done it more than once is Sweeterman. And there are a couple of guys that have pulled CRP out to do organic wheat production. I don't know if they did it straight no-till or not, but anyway, I think there are probably some local sources, and actually finding out what didn't work is as good as finding out what might work.
Yeah, so this is Tyson
Yeah.
Coles. I'm the one that posed the question. And yeah, I know Gordon, he's done some, and he's going to be taking some out as well this year. He's going to use a duck foot and go in and kind of stir it up and till it a little bit that way. And I took soil samples off the field, and looking at that versus my conventional dry land before I went to no-till and my irrigated, my soil health score was more than double in the current CRP soil. So I didn't want to reset that and start over. And I've just been trying to rack my brain, and Brad did send me some articles from guys in the Palouse area that had tried it. And the plot of ground came out of the CRP contract the 1st of October of last year. So I'm going to be doing something with it this spring. I did not get a chance to kill the grass with Roundup or anything last fall, just the way it looked like it had kind of already senesced and was going dormant due to some frost. And I was thinking of killing it with Roundup this spring as best I could, roller crimping it. And then I talked to Marlon yesterday about doing some clovers and legumes intermixed in a wheat or a barley crop, much like we do interseeding alfalfa into barley to get some alfalfa established, and just have them growing as a companion crop at a low rate to see if there may be some beneficial things going on there with the legumes and the grasses. And I was thinking of trying that in this field, but I don't know.
Tyson, this is Marlon.
Yeah.
We haven't been working on CRP ground, but we've been working on perennial hay fields by the thousands of acres in Wyoming. And that's how we're doing it, is when the grass is actively growing, we're spraying it and then drilling our multi-species cover crop in. It's a warm season with some cool season species mixed in it. The challenge with CRP is getting that grass actively growing. And so I think there needs to be some sort of simple disturbance, like, possibly graze it, drag a harrow over it, knock that old residue down so that that grass is actively growing. Some guys have thought about doing a little disturbance in the fall time, some harrows or something to get that grass actively growing for springtime kill. But I don't think roller crimper will do anything to CRP grass, because it's going to be too vegetative to crimp anything when you're trying to terminate it. So
Yeah. Do you have any ideas, Marlon? Because Tyson, speak up if I'm wrong, but I think our biggest issue out there is the humps from the bunch grass. It's pretty uneven and rough. Could we take a disc out at a very low level and shave the tops of those humps off?
Yeah, and I think that's, realize the principle of soil health doesn't say thou shalt no-till. It says minimize soil disturbance, right? And so I'm not a purist. And I think that's when I've been on Gordon's place, he's had to hit it with a chisel point to knock some of them, mounds down a little bit. So I think as long as we keep the principles in mind, maybe we got to hit it one time with a little disturbance. But I've also heard that when you do full tillage in a CRP, you'll set back the carbon storage bank clear back to ground zero again. So I don't think the answer is break out the moldboard plow, but minimize disturbance. And a chemical application is a disturbance, guys, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed another, well, I shouldn't divert if there's more discussion on that topic, please, but before this gets lost, there's a question for Brad about how do you manage for raccoons, skunks, and coyotes with your chickens and ducks? Brad McIntyre. Or Brad might have had to go. I do know that they've used owl boxes. They've built boxes for predatory birds, and they've had some control that way. Marlon, you might be familiar with some of what they've done in terms of predation too.
When I've been to Brad's place over the years, he hasn't had those type of issues for some reason, maybe because we've shot so many coyotes in the past, but I haven't had him share with me what if he's had problems with skunks and raccoons. It's mostly been neighborhood dogs.
And was there a question about, did somebody have a question about the roller crimper and the ability to put water in it? Did the roller crimper in that operation, I guess this was for Brad's presentation, did they have that loaded down with water? Brad Johnson?
Yeah, Cooper, you can speak up if you want, but I think Cooper said on the first field they did not, in the second field they did with their roller crimper, and we did not with ours.
And so effects or comparing notes between having it loaded and not effective one way and not the other, or no difference, or?
You still here, Cooper?
I don't see Cooper on here, but I do think that Fred might still be on. Fred, did you want to speak to that a little bit, if you're still there?
It doesn't look like he has audio connected.
I know we struggled with the termination of the rye on both civets. So not sure if it made that much difference, but wish Cooper was here because he could answer that.
Hey, Brad Johnson, how mature was the triticale? Was it flowering yet? Did it have the anthers out yet?
Yes, it did.
Huh, okay.
And it actually, we got a pretty decent kill on the triticale, but again, they turned the water on that evening and watered it, I think a 24-hour set with a hand line. So, I kind of think the same thing happened out there as at Brossi's. It had such an easy life, it just kept growing. But we did have a really good crimp on both the rye and the triticale, I feel.
Question if Mary's still on, if they've got any other projects up and coming that they're excited about out at the Plant Materials Center, if you'd want to share any info on that.
Yeah, can you hear me right now?
Yep.
Okay,
Sounds
thanks. The project we've got coming up that I'm real excited about is we're going to start working on some cover crop rate trials. So I've heard that sometimes people feel like they plant a cover crop and they didn't get a lot of bang for their bucks. And if you look at different rates that are recommended for cover crop trials, for each species, like say they might recommend between 30 and 100 pounds, and you're like, well, what rate do I pick? So we're going to try to dial it down and just report, we planted a range, like 4 different rates, and what kind of biomass did we get, what kind of cover, and just help you guys use your money better. So that's going to go in this coming fall. And eventually I'd like to also do a rate trial for warm season cover crops and just keep doing those. We're also working on an update to our cover crop selection tool. And that's something that you can get to from the Idaho Plant Materials website. And that's a place that you can go in and you can put in your growing conditions, your goals, what problems you have, and that's a really extensive tool. It's an access database that you can download, and it'll pull for you different cover crops that'll probably work for the purposes that you need.
That's awesome. can you paste a few links into the chat box for folks if they want to
Sure.
go hunt some of this
Yeah,
down?
sure.
That's great.
Thank you.
I've got one last question, then I'll shut up. This was for Barry. And Barry, when you were talking, did I pick up you saying that there, in terms of quality of your stock seemed to be, or there was a little bit of a decline in the quality of your
You're muted, Sean.
Well, that was a whole bunch. So, sorry. The question was for Barry. And did I understand you to say that there was a decline in the quality of your stock that you feel was correlated with the decline in the diversity in your pastures?
If I'm seeing it correctly, Sean, I don't believe Barry's on anymore. I think he was busy in the lambing shed.
Oh, I see. All right. Well, I was busy doing other things, and I thought he came across with that idea. But at any rate, we'll have to take that back up with him later. I thought that was an interesting thing and something to follow on. I see that we are getting a little bit close to lunchtime. This is to be honest with you, I didn't know how long we would go in terms of the question answer and general discussion. I just left it open-ended on purpose. But I know people like to eat, and I certainly don't want to get in anybody's way for lunchtime. But so I think we should probably look at drawing a close on this by noon. If anybody's got anything else they'd like to discuss, general comments or anything of the like, please go ahead.
I'd like to just thank Jackie Jameson for her virtual field days this summer. Those were awesome. I encourage anybody who hasn't watched those to look for them on YouTube. They were phenomenal. Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you, Brad. I'll actually go ahead and share a link to those as well in the chat, so anyone who's interested can take a look.
Awesome. All right. Well, hearing no additional chatter, unless somebody's got something they want to add here, I will submit that we should probably bring this to a close and look forward to seeing everyone on the Idaho 5 for 5 round 2, and thank everyone for participating. There was a lot of great presentations, excellent discussion, very topically rich, and thanks for everyone kicking in to make this a possibility. Really appreciate everyone's efforts here. And with that, I'll just close it out. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Sean. This is awesome.
Yeah, thank you.